Well, I was saying today, maybe exploring some things for topics. I am particularly intrigued by not any particular conspiracy theory, but the notion of conspiracy theories, and I'm interested in how they get started, why they get started, and who's doing that, and what is it that makes some people very susceptible to them. And Dustin, you were just voicing a kind of a complimentary, yin to my yang, I guess, of what are our beliefs, and how do we form our worldview? What things? I don't know if I'm saying it right. Why don't you?
Yeah, and I was excited to hear, Paul, what you might think of these, of starting at the super basic level of what are common wisdoms. So this is the, money corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolute, those kind of common wisdoms, right? And then maybe like what are worldview wisdoms, like if we're on the left side, of lack of words, our worldview might be people are inherently good versus inherently bad. So that's like a worldview truth versus a common wisdom. And I really just want to list them all out and then see how they interplay. But yeah.
No. Well, I sent to you, I think I sent to you, that's what I was trying to do in the beginning here. And I don't know if I've sent this or not. If I haven't yet, I will. But you can Google this yourself if I mess it up. But a thing called a conspiracy theory iceberg. And the one in particular I'm looking at has 10 different levels of conspiracy theory. And there are, I don't know, maybe 1,000 different theories listed. So several hundred at any rate. And it seems to me that people who are susceptible to one are susceptible to many. That once you start believing things without proof, you tend to believe anything. Now, in my personal experience, I spent 16 years in Catholic education, so I have some practical background in trying to understand people who believe things that can't be proven and why they believe them. And sometimes these are benign, believing in an all-powerful being. If that all-powerful being is telling you to do good things and treat each other kindly and that sort of thing, well, maybe it's harmless, or maybe it's even helpful. But on the other hand, it can be twisted and turned in terrible ways. So I don't know if I don't know if I can get to the heart of this, but Dustin, to your point, what does it take for us to believe something? What is required? If someone tells you that, I don't know, something relatively simple, there's life on Mars. All right, there may be life on Mars, there may not be life on Mars. What's it going to take for you to say, yep, that's right, there is? What sort of proof?
Before I get into that, one of the neat things I heard on television, this is from a TV show yesterday, was a priest was talking, and this is a fiction show or whatever. It was a comic line of like, well, I'm Catholic, so we even believe things when we know they're not true. Like this kind of thing. It was great. Why would I believe if there's life on Mars? This was a great example. Why would I believe that? And, it's all about, it's not the facts. This is things I'm getting to, of like, facts actually do care about your feelings, and facts are not the thing that win arguments. We're emotional beings built on human needs, and then the facts come after you've decided something is not threatening to you, and then you can talk about facts. So in my experience, there's the human need, and then there's the comfortable acceptance. So I've accepted science and scientists, so I've determined that they're not a threat to me, so I'm going to listen to them. And if someone tells me there's life on Mars, I have no personal need to debate that. Now, if we're talking about like Russiagate and all that stuff, I might have personal needs, but like that is so innocuous, I would have to really hate science to find it a threat to not believe it at all. So it's think of it. I think of it as more utilitarian, and we have to come back to the basis. But why did I have that worldview in the first place? Was because I grew accustomed to its face. You know, you taught me science, so it became natural part of my in-group morality. If you had taught me the other way,
Yeah.
So exposure is what I'm talking about. You have to have exposure, and just like you're accepting your friends and your family, exposure and acceptance beforehand.
Mhm. Paul, is there something Dustin and I share in common the kind of educational structure that had us consider dogma. These things are that people would tell you these things are true, and you have to believe it.
Right.
That was basically it. So there are many people who just took, okay, I'll believe that, and who never questioned it. And then there are other people like Dustin and I who said, wait a minute, maybe there's another side to this. What was your experience with dogma in your life, or things that people told you were true, or I don't know what the corollary might be?
Well, for me, the question here is, where does the evidence to the contrary or in favor of come from in the first place? That's your question, right? Mm-hmm. You believe the Catholics tell you this, or you believe this because it says so here in the Bible. Oh, okay, I'll believe that because it says here in the Bible. For me, the Bible was Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, right? And who were talking about, and they were like, science is the name of the game here, buddy. And then also they plugged me into, the beginnings of the Renaissance and those guys, so that for example, the refutation to the flat Earth society requires you to believe several things about science. All right, that's the whole thing. It's not like you just, a guy who believes in the flat Earth and doesn't believe in anything else, he'll say, well, look, this is clearly as flat as it can be. You stand on how this house or climb up on the middle, it's still flat. There's a few lumps in it, but it's flat. And the proof that the Earth is round is a whole more complicated thing. The business of the post at the equator that sits there exactly at 12 noon on day, and then you measure the length of the shadow in that one, or the Foucault pendulum, which is much easier it's plain to see. You either have to believe that some force is capable of moving objects without any effort at all, or it's the Earth doing this, it's turning. So that's kind of how bad. So it all came from science in the beginning.
Yeah,
it still does.
There was a great comic that encapsulates that of, we believe, when talking about flat Earth and stuff, and like even from an airplane it looks flat, we believe now more strongly in things we can't see than people 1,000 years ago believed in what they could see.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I find interesting in beliefs. And again, I have to go back to my origins within the structure of the church. And an interesting thing happened after I went through, like I said, 16 years of Catholic education. And I came out of it saying, well, there is some truth behind these things, that people don't believe something just for the sake of believing it. There is a truth, like, people thought the Earth was flat until they were presented with evidence to the contrary. But there was some truth to the notion that the Earth is flat in terms of its appearance. It is apparently flat to many people. So I translated in my own way in the discussion of things from the Bible, people who interpreted the Bible as truth. I like to talk to people about the miracles of Jesus. And I remember I pissed off a lot of people when I talked about this, but the miracles of Jesus begin with the wedding feast at Canaan. And I'm sure you know the story, but Jesus and his friends go to this feast, and his mother is there, and suddenly they run out of wine. And his mother says, what are you going to do about this? And he says, who, me? What am I supposed to do? So what he does is he goes over and he takes a look at these vats. And he says, okay, fill them up with water. So they fill them up with water, and he dips it in, and he says, here, try this wonderful wine. And lo and behold, people say, oh, this is great wine. Well, for some people, it miraculously turned into a wine all of a sudden. For me, it was the faith of people and the kindness of people who didn't want to embarrass the bridegroom, the bride, who said, oh, sure, yeah, this is great wine, you know. And the miracle was that they all went along with it, and nobody was petty and embarrassed the person. Other ones, I could go through the whole list, but the other one was the loaves and the fishes.
Yeah.
People say, okay, boom, we had a few loaves, a few fishes, and suddenly it became this huge baskets full. Well, you can look at it that way, or you can say, well, there are a whole bunch of people and we're passing around the food, and everybody's looking around saying, God, there's not enough for everybody. So they reach into their own box and they throw something in the basket. And as it goes around, pretty soon there's more than they started out with because of the generosity of the people in the crowd. Well, that's a miracle, you know. So to believe in miracles, you don't have to believe in magic. You just have to have an understanding of it. So for me, the point I'm trying to make is people who believe in conspiracy theories misinterpret the reality. They observe something, but they're misinterpreting it. It's like Chicken Little, the sky is falling. Yeah, you got hit on the head, but that you're not interpreting it correctly. So does that make sense as a kind of a rule that it's a misinterpretation of reality?
Yeah, and I'll just interject real quick, Paul. I use the word need instead of truth, but same concepts.
Yeah,
Truth. It's funny, we're sitting here having this discussion about the various things that are believed in, and right behind Michael is the image of the ocean.
yeah, I believe it there. Yeah.
And yet, we know that if you stood there long enough and watched a ship sail directly away from you, it would get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until just the top of it was showing,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would disappear.
Yeah.
You know, if it was not flat, if it was not flat, you would see it until it was so tiny that you couldn't see it at all. But other than that, you could see it all the way out there.
Yeah.
But obviously, no, that's not.
Yeah.
Nobody has an expensive enough boat to go prove it for among most of us, you know.
Right.
Yeah, you know, arguing about, or discussing, you know, what's truth and what's not, it almost invariably comes away from the first question is, well, what's the difference? What's the point in having this discussion? You know, are you trying to prove that Jesus did feed all these people, or effectively fed all those people, and so the magic.
Getting a buzz on the sound. I don't know if that's your fault.
Me too.
Yeah, it's gone.
There you go. It went away. Okay. And I mean, you know, once you start talking about religious questions, you know, you immediately complicate the matter, likely to impossible position of resolution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, you're not going to ever find out in a way that we would know whether or not Jesus, you know, saves people after they die and resurrects them. Yeah, you know, maybe, but I'm not likely to see that or experience it, or if it does, there will be this insurmountable connection between the me now and the me then that effectively it won't, you know, it's like, well, how can I know that? I can't.
Yeah, it's the same questions, but with this is about my attitude toward recycling. Let's take down from Jesus to recycling. Now, I can approach recycling as, even if I think it's good or bad or not to the greater world, I know I should do it just because it's the right thing. Now, I take that with the knowledge of most of your recycling doesn't get recycled.
Right.
So should you recycle? Should you do something should I still do it even though I know it's not making a difference. And maybe I spend all the energy, not that I give energy to recycling, but I should be fighting the 70 companies in the world that provide the 90% of plastics in the ocean, that kind of crap. You know, do I fight the root cause, or do I do this even though I know even the stuff I put in the bucket won't actually get recycled? Do I still do it because I feel it's the right thing? Like, what is going on in my head and not, and what makes one better or not? Like, what makes that a truth?
Well,
Good question.
at the risk
The
of,
argument is first, would you say, is that a truth?
yeah. Well, it's,
You know, if you might recycle or otherwise handle your disposal of food and food waste and whatnot in a way that it has the least amount of impact on it, it literally is as much as, you know, who you and I, or who I know who have a position about that. So we all agree on that. It makes us all feel good. Okay, that's fine. And we also know that, well, some of that stuff goes away, or at least at the very least, the glass reruns. In any case, you know, if we don't do that, then we're going to wind up with a lot of people who are sick and dying, which is hardly an improvement, because you know, stuff is not being properly handled. I mean, you know, and if we come back to the question of what we were starting with, were the, you know, the third flat Earth society kinds of arguments, and those are the ones that can be resolved. You know, you can demonstrate to people that, yep, no such thing. You know, you go this and this happens, and I make a prediction, and my prediction comes true because I know that it's backed up by science. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, that's.
Now, I know I'm doing it because I want to figure out if I'm a good person and I'm on the right side and I'm doing good, and like that is I'm progressing there. And there's a lot of pitfalls in that thinking or whatever. And there's a lot of good things. I have a suspicion that the conspiracy person is not doing it for the betterment of humanity or the betterment of themselves.
No, probably not.
But I don't know why they're doing it. Is it just, well, usually like the conspiracies, Michael, I think you're talking about are the farthest one. They're the most egregious. There's, you know, the person who's gone off the deepest end. You know, and I was trying to bring it back to like a conspiracy about recycling, which is not a.
well, I think
To
that
see somebody having that discussion, you don't think they're going to take a gun to the supermarket.
right. Well, I think you know, you're bringing up something that it's about what your predisposition might be. That if you are, Paul, in your case, you said we can prove it. Well, if you're predisposed to believe in science, you know, and you understand the scientific method, and you know, you think, well, you know, there's truth in that, then the proof that I might offer that the world is not flat, you're going to accept. If you're predisposed not to believe in science, if you think scientists are constantly lying to you and they're telling you things that are not true, then your first reaction might be just the opposite. I'm not going to believe it because the scientists are telling me. You know, we go through this with politicians too. All those politicians lie. How can you believe any of them? You know, so there is a predisposition to accept or not accept something, you know, something where there is, at least from your own perspective, no definitive proof. One of the examples is I hear people talk about the theory of evolution, which was a great, you know, a lot of people in this country went through that. The biblical notion contradicted the scientific, and you were asking people, they thought you were asking them to give up their faith in order to accept this science. And you still hear people talking about, well, it's just a theory of evolution. Well, you know, if you believe in science, you understand that a theory is not just a wild idea. It's observing a truth and forming a hypothesis to validate that truth. It's an observation of truth. Evolution, yes, is true. Exactly how it evolved, what the theory is, and how we define that might vary, and people could have legitimate arguments about how evolution occurs. But because something is theoretical doesn't mean that it hasn't been proven. But I think, if you're immersed in science, you're already there and you're looking for that kind of validation. If you reject science, you can't let it enter your brain. It's like, I can't see this. And I think that translates now into vaccines and masks and all the other things that we see. If my predisposition is I'm not going to believe it, well, nothing you say is going to convince me.
Right. Now, I think of that in terms of need, and my greatest example is diet, right? You don't lose weight by stop eating the bad stuff. You drive yourself crazy and then you go through the cycle, whatever. You lose weight by eating more vegetables. You accept the science by this is the thing on the left that the left doesn't understand, is you need to introduce a better option, not just destroy the poor, the worst option. Like ours is, let me tell you why you're wrong. Not, hey, let me give you what you want, just better. I'm talking about, we need to start a new religion. We need to start a new economic system. We need these better things. Well, the thing about religion is okay, you've got that need. Well, how do I fulfill it? I'm not going to fulfill it by just saying that need is bad, so don't do the thing. You're just like you're the flat earth stuff, or the evolution is you're just going to take away my religion. It's no, I want to replace your religion with something doing the same thing, just better.
Well, I mean, if you call it, what's the fundamental quote, beliefs in religion, or what science puts out there, there's only the one thing. It's just, is the hypothesis that you have posited true or not? Does it get the results that you have predicted? Yes, no. Oh, okay. Yes, it does. Well, then we'll go on and say this. We demonstrated that, in fact, this produces the same result that you expected. You might want to test that some more. Same thing. Yeah. So it's really just that one little method for determining is it true or not.
Well, what about in the situation of gay marriage is a clearer example, where there are people on the left and the right who want to support the idea of marriage. And who is the biggest proponent of marriage? Well, at least 10 years ago, it was gay people who wanted to die for the right to marry. Those are the biggest proponents. So these are obvious allies. And then once you go through that discussion, you can filter out, well, you were really against it because you're a bigot. But outside of that, there are probably, and I don't know what the numbers would be, but I would imagine they're larger than we think, of people who just want to support marriage. So you approach them with, here's another ally for marriage. And they're the same thing with the abortion topic, which again is so politicized, it's hard to even think of. Yeah. But it's okay, if you're against abortion, then you need to join me and get every orphan adopted. And you need to adopt some kids yourself. If you're against abortion, you need to give everybody birth control. If you're against abortion, you need to do all these things that actually live. Are you against abortion, or are you something else? And through those discussions, it's something else. But again, on the left, we kind of generalize it. Everybody generalizes everything. What are the group of people I could have reached doing that? Now, there's obviously going to be some bigots, and there's obviously going to be some whatevers. What about the other people? The ones who just went along with it.
What's interesting, what about, this is one thing I was going to bring up, what about conspiracy theories on the left? We tend to think of conspiracy theories as a right-wing phenomenon, but on the left, do we not have conspiracy theories about corporations? And admittedly, there are evil, terrible corporations, but there are also some decent ones who are doing good. But
not from my point of view, but no.
Well, don't we immediately say, no, if it's a corporate entity, then they're in league with the devil and we hate them and so forth. Isn't that a conspiracy theory as well?
I have an answer. Well, on mine, I take it a little differently, because it's this is the same idea of, we can go down the road of how can you be a good person in a bad system? There are corporate leaders, and they're people who in the capitalist world that are just trying to do right by themselves, and they're them and theirs. and you can't fault them for that. The system itself is the thing that's corrupt. How do you be a good person in a corrupt system? And so a corporation is inherently evil because of how it's set up. It's profit above all else. That is a fact. Now, within that system, you can have good people, but they're ultimately serving an evil, even though they themselves are good. So it's not a conspiracy. It's a fundamental understanding of the structure.
They're being
Now, there's definitely bias. Like if you tell me, I heard something on corporate news, my immediately reaction of stop watching corporate news, not, oh, there might be something good on there. So that's just a bias, not a conspiracy. The left-wing conspiracy would be, the most modern one would be Russiagate.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important, if you're trying to get other people to change, you need to demonstrate your own ability to change, and that's something that when I hear the folks from the Black Lives Matter movement, they're talking about the police department, and I understand there are some pretty rotten cops around, but I also know cops, and I've worked with cops. And I know that there are a lot of good ones there as well. Yeah. And they're sort of caught up in that same system. What if you're a cop and you're told to go out and do an arrest in the middle of the night, and you're in shady circumstances and you end up shooting somebody, does that mean you're an evil person out there ready to kill all the black people? No, it might. You might be, but it's, in our system, we say you're innocent until proven guilty, which means suspend judgment. And I have problems sometimes with I remember one incident where there was a young black man killed, and there was an immediate uproar until everybody realized that it was a black cop who killed him. And then there was sort of, well, wait a minute, this was not quite the same thing. So I have problems with folks on the left who fall into the same trap of making judgments based on their inclination or their prejudice, and not examining things closer. So I don't believe all corporations are evil. I don't believe all cops are corrupt or evil. I think you take it on a case by case basis, but I'm not sure I'm honing in on anything specific.
I'm looking up left-wing conspiracy theories. They're harder to find.
Well, I guess my goal is, how do you deal with someone? I know people right now who say that the coronavirus was all a big sham. There was really nothing to it, and it was a conspiracy by essentially people on the left to change the result of the election, and to control. Even some who say, well, they're injecting chips in us so they can track us like dogs and cats and that sort of thing. And my only response to them is just to ignore them. How do you get into an argument with somebody who believes that? I mean, you end up saying you're fucking nuts, and that's not getting you anywhere, just calling them names. But I don't know if there's anything besides simply avoiding them. If what you were saying, Dustin, about give them something more positive, I think that there's something to that. So what's our rule of thumb for confronting someone who believes in something we think is ridiculous? Do we ignore them? Do we present them with scientific evidence? Do we,
Yeah. This is from I have no idea, but it's one, changing the question and the approach kind of thing. It's often not the message, it's the messenger. It's the, you cannot even coercing people. You have no control over others. You can only influence. So you have to make it a non-threatening, and change the environment. It comes down to, how do you actually have an intervention? How do you actually deprogram somebody in a cult? And go watch those TV shows. And it's a long you have to have an investment. There's a reason you put all that freaking energy. It's usually because they're a family member or something. if they're a stranger, first change yourself, like change your questions, like don't expect to change their mind. Don't expect them to hear anything you say. Just kill them with kindness is the general rule. And then maybe you know that if you're not kind to them, you know that if you just criticize them, you know what effect that has. Roll the dice with the other one.
Well, we do have a new, somewhat more real problem to deal with. It doesn't involve complicating people's political positions into it that much, and that is the Air Force is releasing of all these videos.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Strange objects flying around in the sky, in which even the President of the United States said, "Well, we don't know what they are." There's stuff flying around there, but we haven't had a clue as what it is. And yet you look at those things, and so you see, let's call them UFOs because that's easy to keep track of. UFOs making speed changes that would turn, as somebody said, turn the ordinary human body into a platter full of putty, because you can't get rid of the laws of inertia, which is the thing. That's always when I watch them, I think, that whatever that thing is, there's not anything in there that can be killed by inertia. And so, and yet here are these things that the people who are in the business of making sure we'd be able to all be scared and worried that they're going to, the Russians are going to attack us, are saying, we don't know what the hell this is. We got these pictures, and here's the picture. You don't see the pictures. So what, are those all lies? Are they producing these and just giving you lies, and all the pilots, but they're all lying? Or is this something that they finally decided we don't know? Or have they moved it further down the line? How do you approach a problem like that?
Well, that's interesting. What's your predisposition? What are you inclined to believe when someone says, I witnessed, and they show you a picture and say, I witnessed this object in the sky? What's your inclination?
I want to see a whole bunch of that.
You want to see confirmation from different
confirmation. Let me see confirmation. See some objects. I mean, things that go, maybe that was created by a laser beam and shined on the clouds and bouncing. And of course, you can speak. Light moves pretty fast in that case.
Dustin, are you predisposed to believe anything about?
Sure, I'm predisposed to not believe in UFOs, mainly because just on the science that we know of how difficult it is to go find another sentient species and visit them. Mm-hmm. And if a society figured that out, what are the chances that they would be as haphazard as to be found? It's like, if you're smart enough to figure out how to cross 1,000 light years in a lifetime, are you dumb enough to get caught? Or maybe they don't care. We're ants to them, so it doesn't matter. Like, when you really run through the things, like it's Occam's razor is what makes my
right. Now, I was about to say, the equivalent of that I tend to look for a banal explanation. There's probably something obvious. To me, I hear about space junk all the time. There are hundreds of thousands of tons of crap floating around the Earth that people have shot up there in rockets. And I don't know if they're all going in the same direction, the same orbit. So the chances are that one of them is either pushing or colliding or something with another one. Talk about the change in speed. If you have two objects, one is going 10,000 miles an hour and the other is going 20,000 miles an hour, and they collide, well, one of them's going to take off in the other direction pretty quickly. So I tend to think, well, let's disprove all of the Sherlock Holmes approach. Once you take away all the things that are impossible, then you get that explanation. But I would not jump to say, oh, see, because I think there are extraterrestrial beings out there. So boy, that must be one of them there. I don't want to jump to that. But I think that's indicative of what a general response to new information is. If you're predisposed to believe that, these things are happening, then you're going to see that as a confirmation.
Mhm.
If you're not, you're going to, as Paul says, you're going to look for more evidence. What is it? And
Yeah.
I could believe that there were extraterrestrials. That's not out of the realm of possibility. I'd say there's 1 in 100 trillion chance that
Right.
is, but I'd need a whole lot of
Yeah. Now mine would be, instead of like you're going the more natural route of like space junk, my predisposition would be I don't trust the military. So it's a super secret spycraft, not a UFO. Like that's where I have no proof or any reason, but because I'm predisposed to mistrust the military, that's where I go.
Yeah.
As opposed to space junk. But I'm still within I don't believe in it, I'm never going to meet, I think I'm never going to meet an alien. Now I've found these were hard to find because mostly these conspiracies on the left are from the right. And so they're insane. They're not from the left. And most of the conspiracy, there's just less, but there are some. So the best one, and I don't know what PJ Media is, but this was the Russian bounties hoax, which I'd like to talk about. There was this dismantling the postal service, and then there's the Trump Russia. Now, there's a lot of, I don't want to get into Trump Russia. It's very complicated. There are truths in that, but it's so complicated. It consumed us for a long time. So it's way too much to unpack. But I was weirded out by, there's this Russian bounties hoax, and we can get into that. And that made sense to me at the time. Then there's this Trump's dismantling of the post office. Somehow that was a conspiracy. And I'm like, well, no, that was proven. And it wasn't just Trump. It's been trying to be dismantled for a long time. There's specific legislation you can go find. Yeah, it's not secret. And you can draw back to the specific legislation that happened to just start dismantling. That was the pension legislation to dismantle the post office. So that's not a conspiracy. I mean, it's a bias to blame Trump for it. Just like the migrant camps and the family child separation was different, and it was nasty it was a bigoted, nasty response for political reasons. But Obama was deporting people too, those cages. He built the cage, so it's weird on conspiracy. So the Russian bounties hoax. This was the last one that's a little easier to digest because I don't think it makes at least the three of us defensive. Right. So when this Russian bounty is, when I heard desperation of the military industrial complex. I'm paying the Russian bounty, this doesn't make this. It's so egregious and so big, and there's so little proof. My initial reaction is, if a intelligence agency that's trained to lie to me is telling me something, my first reaction is to believe the opposite. So
you point out my dilemma. During the 60s, if you ask me about the FBI, I'd say I don't trust those bastards.
Yeah.
But now that the FBI is probing into Trump's finances,
now you do. It's okay.
If they're saying what I want to hear, and I think that's a big part of it behind conspiracy theories is somebody says what I want to hear.
What you want to hear.
And the danger today is in one of the things we covered several months ago in talking about the media and what sort of things you watch, what things you listen to. Today, in the past, if you believed in flat Earth, you didn't have a lot of resources. Today, you'll find probably 1 million people who believe the same thing because people have posted things on the internet, and stories, and all of this pseudo truth around that you can latch onto. So, the conspiracies can take off simply because, it is literally the Chicken Little story, that Ducky Lucky says it, so I'm going to believe him, not just Chicken Little. Look, everybody's saying this guy.
Truth is so 20th century.